Hi everyone. On the last episode we talked about data acquisition via databases, and on this episode I want to talk about data acquisition via APIs. One of the most common protocols to know, or at the very least one of the most popular ones that have emerged in the last few years after XML was a little bit too complicated and bloated for just sending data, there was this format that was really popular that is called JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. The format basically just describes a very simple notation where you can just describe data and data types. And essentially, as we can see on the left side of the screen, we see, for example, an object which has a key that is key value pairs. And that's basically how it describes an object, by key value pair, similar to a dictionary or a hash map, represented by curly brackets, then the string or object that defines a key, and then colon, and then the object that describes a value. So in this one on the left, I am describing multiple data types, like an array, which is enclosed by elements separated by a comma and enclosed by square brackets. The other one is just another object that shows how you can nest different objects to really build something really complicated and really difficult. Now, array and object are just names that I'm putting here. They can be whatever. They can be representing, I don't know, streets, addresses, users, whatever abstraction that you want to put, you can, describe it that way. Inside of that secondary object, I have just in strings a boolean as a key, and the value being how you represent a boolean, uppercase, lowercase, true or false for a boolean. A string, it is always with quotes. A number is just a number typed. It could be either a decimal or it could be either an integer or a float, and a null value, it could be just that. On the right hand side, we have a little bit of an illustration that just shows us more or less like the data structure that an object can have, or a value can have. So if we looked at this API, for example, if we open up a new browser window and we copy this, which is from the one of the government pages that tracks climate and temperatures per year. So in this case, we're tracking year by year from 2018 to 2018. So we're going to see that there's going to be a monthly representation that has 2018-01, 2018-02, 2018, etc. And the value for the global average temperature for that region. To that URL, even if you remove the year thing, it's going to display you a page where you can parameterize whatever you want, and you can say, okay, well, it's now going to be from 2018. So it's essentially returning the same URL, but without the .json. If you do the .json, it renders just the data. If you do it without the .json, it renders the charts that represent that data. So this is something really cool and really interesting to play with. And it will, display the somehow like the data that you can get from that API. I chose this API because you don't have to use any authentication, and you get some data similar to this, just as a freebie, basically. So what I'm going to do, and where's my data one? Data sources, this window, and let's just change it for Darkula. So if we bring in the project that we had last class, and let me just make it big enough, I'm going to create the exact same class that we had for the previous video. So we're going to create a class called NOAA And in this class, in this object, I'm just going to go public static void main string args, and I'm gonna even copy the code because it doesn't really help me with having to type things by hand. So I'm just gonna read this URL, and I'm just gonna essentially I'm gonna do like a very simple reader. I'm gonna read it from a URL class, and I'm explaining it as I go. The address string address equals, let's just get this guy, the 2018. We're gonna put it as an address. This guy's everything else that we have here. Let's import this guy. All these other guys, if we try to import it, it's gonna complain. It's not gonna find it, so it's gonna suggest creating the class. Same thing for this. So what we need to do for our project to be successful is that we need to import the Google API for reading JSON, and this is just one of the many APIs. Like if you go into the JSON.org website, you can find the different packages in per language. So if you're doing this on C or C++, this has become kind of like a standard in programming. So I decided to use the Google JSON because it's supported, very well supported. It is very well used. You know, like you can see how many people are using it and how many people are watching and starting and forking these projects. So it's very well maintained. It is really fast. So I like to use this one. And the easiest way to get it into your project is by going into project structure. And then in libraries, just like we did with the MySQL connector in the last one, we can go into from Maven and do com.google.code.json, and then we search this thing, and let's the latest version, which is in this case 285. We're gonna add it to our project, and now if we alt enter, it's going to start importing the elements needed from this one was coming from Java util. So it imported the necessary packages from the JSON. So we're still seeing a little bit of red, but this is from just not having a try catch. So we're gonna try to put in inside of that block, just, you know, we're gonna move everything here. We're gonna put this guy here and move this thing out. And now we have a system where now there's an IO exception here. So if we add another catch, I'm just trying to reconstruct what I grabbed from the slide, but I'm gonna post the code on the description. And this guy is gonna throw an IO exception. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna open up a URL, and I can just get a stream from the URL class, which I can pass to an input stream reader, because a JSON reader needs a reader. So the JSON reader is just a convenience class from this guy, and we can go into the API here on the Java doc for the JSON API, and we can do JSON reader. And the JSON reader is just a great way of passing even from a file or whatever, an input stream reader, whether it's a file, whether it's a URL, whether it's whatever, and be able to read the data. So from that reader, we're going to generate also a JSON class, and that JSON, we're going to try to get it from a JSON, which uses a JSON reader, and we're going to describe the top object. Now in our API, if we add the .json, we're going to realize, and this, whenever you're actually looking into text like this, it might be a little bit confusing because it's not really easy to read. So the easiest way to do this, to understand and navigate the APIs, is by right-clicking into the inspect of part of your browser, of Chrome, or in this case Brave. I like Brave because of security and privacy, but you can use whatever browser that you want, and you can just copy and paste this thing. And here, the output, it's going to be a navigatable JSON object. So we can see that the top level item is a dictionary or an object, a JSON object, because in JSON is not a dictionary, is an object. So we're going to say that the top object of this guy is going to be an object, and that's going to give us our root. So if we stop here and put a debugger and debug our entry, we're going to see that at this point, by the time that it reads the API, you're going to see that the root is now a JSON object that has been parsed, that now has description, and it has the key value hash of things. So you can see like every single element that now it has it, and the value items, which has all the proper things, and the data. So you can see on the value of that object, once we're navigating those objects, we can see that it's a key value pair of the year concatenated with the month and the value as a string in both cases. So we can see, yes, it is a string, it is that. But this is just a simple way of like navigating the API. So anyway, we see that this, once we got to this point, it's parsed correctly. Now what I want to do is, all the meaty stuff is under the data object, the data key. So I'm going to try to get as a JSON object, because I got to know a little bit of that structure. So I know that this guy's a key value pair because I'm seeing it here. So I'm going to say that from the root, get as a JSON object the key that it's data. So now I got a new object that is representing just these guys. So if we go into the next line, we're going to see that now if we close the root, now there's a data JSON object that represents that sub part where it has all these members of the key value pairs. If I want to just go in and parse the next thing, I can get an entry set, and an entry set is going to return to me, as we can see here. By now I'm getting this thing. If you're probably putting your cursor and you're not getting it, I'm getting these pop-ups by just in a Mac pressing the command key, and that is giving me in a PC, I don't know which one would it be, but it would be either the Windows key or the Control key or the Alt key. Just play with that a little bit and you'll find it. But you'll see a little bit of that description without even having to go back into the API, because in the API, if I go into finding out JSON object, I would have to go and see that there's a thing that it's an entry set that is just going to give me a set of map entries that has a key value pair. So this is gonna give me the key value pairs just for me to iterate. And this is the way to navigate it, because anything that you see like get as JSON array or JSON primitive, which would return as a string or as a JSON primitive, you know, you're gonna see like is the parent class of a JSON element, it's the holding class that can return to you a character, a double, a float, an int, a long. You know, this converts you into the primitive values that Java usually has. So if just to not really confuse you, the best way to go and navigate this thing is by using JSON object, get the entry set, and we're assigning the same way a set with a map entry of a string and a JSON element. Why is it a string and a JSON element, even though that here it is marked as, oh, it's actually marked as string and JSON element, because in JSON, that's how you have objects. They're a little less flexible than the ones in Java that you can put any object as a key. Anyway, so now, because I have a list of map.entries, which is it's a class, just consider this entire thing the name of a class that has a key value pair. So each entry is each one of these. So this is one entry, another entry, another entry. So the set is this part. What we're holding with the set, the entry set is this. What we're holding with each map entry is these guys. So as we're iterating through the entry set, we're iterating through each one of these. That's why you see this for loop that has a string and element. And I'm gonna get the key by saying the entry get key. I'm getting the string, and then I'm gonna break, in this case, the key into because it's 6 characters. The first 4 characters is a year, the last 2 is the year, so the month. I'm breaking this into a substring, so I'm calling it raw year, and then I'm getting the year and the month. And then the value, I know that I can parse this as a float, so I am trying to force it to get it as a float, and then after that I'm just printing it. So if I stop the debugger and run this guy, now I get a perfect breakdown of values for my NOOA JSON object. So everything that we've done so far is just without authentication, but then at some point we gotta get into something a little bit more personal. And the idea is that we need to put in HTTP provides us the mechanism for putting an authentication into the header of the request. Now, for us to understand that, we need to describe what is an HTTP request, and the HTTP request is usually comprised of the URL, which has a protocol, the TLD, which is the .com.edu, and the path, the parameters, which go after a question mark, and then usually after a key value pair of key and value pair type of things. The entire domain is the entire qualified URL, and inside of that usually we just send a dictionary with key value pairs of what the header is, and in the body a similar approach, which, you know, in the body is more just arbitrary data, whether you send it as a binary stream or something like that. You usually say what the data that you're sending on the body is on the content type of the header. And the header is really important because sometimes that includes credentials. The header can travel encrypted if you're using HTTPS. Okay, so let's do a little bit of an exercise, and we're going to go into GitHub, and then we're going to go into our where is this thing? We're going to go into your settings and developer settings, and then you can go into personal token accesses, and here you would get you can create a token, and I'm just gonna generate a new token. I'm gonna generate a new token. In this case, that it says I'm gonna name it as Java class access. I'm gonna say that my public repo, my read user. I'm not giving it any granting of any powers. So I generate a token. Here it appeared, but for security purposes, I am gonna block it out from the code. I am going to go back to our project here, and I'm going to then do a new Java class GitHub auth, and I'm just going to do a very similar thing of what we did: public static void main string args, and then I'm going to go back into our super slides. Actually, I'm gonna copy very much so the code from this guy just to modify it. I'm gonna use the NOAA JSON as the way to access. I'm gonna import all the proper classes. I'm gonna start modifying the address, because in my address I am going to use this GitHub user thing. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to save my token as a token.txt, and I'm gonna copy this value and just essentially erase all these guys, because what I want to show you is how I am going to create. I'm gonna remove all these guys. So now I have this very basic entry, and what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna put whatever values here. Again, let's see, replace me with your token. I'm gonna save it as a token dot this file for security purposes. So also I'm going to say file or token string token equals, and we're going then to also read our token by. So I'm gonna put the code that reads the file reader. I'm gonna import just a traditional scanner. Good. So I am putting a token, and just to verify that it's reading, I'm gonna run my code where I am getting replace me with your token. After this point, I'm gonna put in here the value of my token and then close the file. So I copied pasted into my token file, and now I have my token ready for GitHub, which essentially is just putting it as a string. So I am going to then generate my string auth token and put these values here. And essentially, just because I was able to create a token, which is essentially like a pre-handshake, this is why you gotta make sure that when you're not using your tokens, you delete them. And I'm going to also add this URL connection that for some reason I didn't have it copied. So now that I have this URL connection, import class, and then import class, input stream. So now it's very basic. I am using a URL connection. In the URL connection, I'm setting a request property, which is essentially going to put the header with an authorization and a basic auth. How did I know how to connect to it? Well, GitHub, and in the slides here, provides me with how to connect to things. So now it's going to tell me that how my URL, after generating the token, when we go into the REST API, you can see that there's an authentication, and you can just pass the authorization, just like it says here, the token, the OAuth token, which is a concatenation of our token and the token, just that the keyword token. And that's basically what this call is basically what we're going to be doing. This call meaning calling the API with an authorization, the keyword token, and the value that we generated. So with that in mind, we can now call our super URL that it's going to tell me my profile. It's going to parse it as a JSON, and I'm just trying to print what that string is returning. So now you can see that my user, my node, avatar, etc., it is displayed by just connecting to the API and using the authorization. What happens if I don't pass the authorization? We're gonna get a response 401 and a 401. If we go into HTTP 401, you're gonna see that it's unauthorized. So we're getting the proper error that it's telling us the HTTP response code 401 for URL because we didn't authenticate. If we add the authorization back again, we'll get the profile to read. Now that we've got then this data, it is then important to highlight what to do with it. So there is this example in one of the links that it's on my GitHub. If we go into Java class a table view, you can see how I am, in the case of our previous NOAA, I have an M, the view, the model, the view, and the controller. In the model, which is the temperature, for our NOAA things that we had, the year, month, and the value, I created this class that essentially is representing each one of the entries, the year, month, and the value, and how to read with a static method that returns an observable list. And an observable list is something really important for JavaFX, because it's a list that you can, as you modify the values in that list, the UI will display those values. So it's a really useful thing to do rather than having to okay, now I got a new list, now I gotta send it to the UI. Essentially, you're just modifying. If you build your models to have support for observable lists, then your JavaFX objects will automatically work and update themselves. Now you can see here in the same, it's basically the same code that we were coding not so long ago earlier in this video, but since we're generating an observable list, we're generating an observable list as from the effects collections, and we are adding just the objects called temperature, but which is this object that we've generated, new object. But you can see here that rather than putting it as a string or as a string and as a float, we're using a string property. That is to give the proper support for the tables to know how to get and set the data. That's why also it is important that we add all these getters and setters, which will do 80% of the work for us. In other words, if I wanted to open up this Java 2 class table view project, and I'm just going to open it up as a new window, and I'm going to bring it here, you can see that when I reload the object, it automatically will load the data properly, and you can see how it loads every year from 1880 to 2018, and it actually does it pretty darn fast. Another thing that it's really important of this, as it is drawing and doing that in this project, just this is where we mix some of the other classes. As we are performing the load, you can see here as an example that is doing it in an asynchronous mode, essentially blocking, not blocking the UI from displaying. So when we do it that way, when we are preventing the UI from being blocked, there's one challenge. Only the main thread of the application can draw the data. So this is where, if you see something like there's this pre-draw, is that I'm gonna try to draw as many things as possible before I make the call asynchronous, because I am trying to draw everything in the main thread. Then the asynchronous thing happens, and the last step of my asynchronous call is the draw chart, which the draw chart, after it calculates everything, uses this platform.run later, which will tell the main thread to essentially set the data with the data that we calculated. This is important again because this is just essentially kicking back everything that we did from an asynchronous side thread into the main thread, so that way it can be drawn properly. Everything else in here is just essentially calculating how I am, calculating some averages and things like that. But because in the chart, when the way that I'm getting all these data, I'm getting it, if you can see this, I am getting year by year by year by year. I mean, year and month, year and month, year and month. Here I am not drawing as many. I'm actually just drawing the years rather than year, month, year, month, year, month. So essentially I am resampling all these guys into averages. In this method here, I just wanted to do like the sample where we are trying to set up the chart values, which is, the chart is only one value per year. And the way that I'm doing that change is by loading all the series and going and iterating year by year and detecting changes in my list, and then calculating the average for that year, and essentially putting it into a new series, which this is one series, this is another series of data, but this one is derived from this one. Again, these are just tips and tricks on how to bring it all back from the data world into the MVC controller things, into the MVC controller world, which, if we see this from the view side of things, is just a table, and this is just a chart. Really doesn't have anything other than references for us to be able to access the data from here, which these are the only two references. And this is the only way that we can just control whatever the view did through the controller. For any other questions regarding this, I recommend you watching the video for FXML. And because this last part, just I'm trying to quickly let you know how to connect and bring things back from the data world. Anyway, I hope you found this useful, and please subscribe to this, and see you next time.